The relentless sun beat down on the parched plains of Redemption County, baking the dust that rose in lazy puffs with every gust of wind. Along the rutted track that passed for a road, a small figure trudged, no bigger than a tumbleweed herself, it seemed, against the vast expanse of Silas Blackwood's Bar M ranch. This was Ilara, a child whose age was a guess, her origins a whisper. Her home, if one could call it that, was the Greywood orphanage on the frayed edge of the nearest town, a place where charity was measured in thin blankets and thinner gruel. Ilara possessed a quiet acuity, an observer stillness that often made her invisible, a useful trait in a world that offered little comfort to a child alone. Her hands, though small and often smudged with grime, were surprisingly deft, capable of mending a torn dress with near-invisible stitches or coaxing a wilting plant back to life in the orphanage's barren yard. These were skills unnoticed, unvalued, like the girl herself. On her right hand, on a finger far too slender for its burden, she wore a ring, a simple band of tarnished silver, intricately carved with what looked like interlocked horseshoes and a tiny, almost indistinguishable star. It was her only possession of true mystery, a silent testament to a life before Greywood, a life she couldn't remember. Miles away, closer to the grand, sprawling ranch house that was the heart of the Blackwood Empire, a different kind of drama was unfolding. Silas Blackwood, a man whose name was synonymous with wealth and unyielding will, stood beside his prized possession, a custom-built coach, more akin to a land yacht than a mere wagon, its polished mahogany gleaming even under a film of trail dust. Its intricate suspension system, designed for Silas's comfort on his frequent tours of his vast holdings, had catastrophically failed. One of the massive, leaf spring assemblies had snapped, leaving the opulent vehicle listing like a wounded galleon. Silas, a man whose patience was as legendary as his fortune was vast, was currently exhibiting none of it. His face, weathered by decades under the Texan sun, was a thundercloud. "Blast and damnation," he roared, his voice accustomed to commanding men and beasts across thousands of acres. "Can none of you overpaid loafers figure this out?" His ranch hands, seasoned men who could rope a steer in a dust storm or mend a fence blindfolded, shuffled their feet, exchanging nervous glances. They were cowhands, not mechanics of such a complex, bespoke contraption. The foreman, a grizzled man named Jed, wiped sweat from his brow with a bandana. "Boss, this ain't like no buckboard. That spring, it's a special make. Snapped clean through. We ain't got the tools, nor the part, out here." Silas kicked at a loose stone, his expensive leather boot sending it skittering. "Then earn your keep and find a way. I'm not spending the night out here playing audience to the coyotes because my $50,000 wagon decides to shed its underpinnings." His gaze swept the horizon, as if daring the solution to simply materialize. It was then, as the dust settled from his outburst, that a small, hesitant voice piped up. Ilara, driven by a curiosity that sometimes overrode her instinct for self-preservation, had wandered closer than she intended, drawn by the commotion and the sight of the magnificent, albeit crippled, vehicle. She had been collecting dried kindling along the fence line, a task assigned by Mrs. Grimshaw, the orphanage matron, when the tableau of frustrated men and the broken coach caught her eye. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice barely a squeak, yet it cut through the tense silence. Silas Blackwood, a towering figure in his tailored western suit and wide-brimmed Stetson, turned slowly, his eyes, the color of cold steel, narrowing as they focused on the diminutive child who dared address him. He was not accustomed to being addressed by unsolicited urchins. "What is it, girl? Can't you see we have a problem here?" His tone was sharp, dismissive, a verbal swat meant to send her scurrying. The ranch hands looked on, a mixture of pity and apprehension on their faces. One of them, a younger man named Cletus, snorted. "Looky here, a field mouse come to offer advice." Ilara flinched almost imperceptibly at the scorn but stood her ground, her gaze fixed not on Silas's imposing figure, but on the damaged undercarriage of the coach. The torsion shackle, it sheared off its mounting bolts because the primary leaf in the spring assembly fractured under load, she stated, her voice clear and surprisingly steady, though still quiet. "You can see the stress lines near the fracture point. It wasn't just a sudden break, it was fatigued." She pointed a small, dirt-stained finger towards the mangled steel. A stunned silence fell over the group. The men stared, first at Ilara, then at the broken spring, then back at Ilara. Jed, the foreman, leaned down, squinting at where she indicated. He grunted, a sound of reluctant acknowledgement. Silas Blackwood himself, for the first time that afternoon, seemed momentarily lost for words. He lowered his head slightly, peering at the child with an expression that shifted from irritation to utter disbelief. Who was this slip of a girl, speaking of torsion shackles and stress fractures with such unnerving accuracy? The men exchanged bewildered glances. Jed scratched his head, his earlier confidence in his own assessment visibly shaken. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, crouching for a closer look at the fractured leaf spring. "She might be right about that fatigue, boss. Look here, these hairline cracks spreading from the main break." Silas, a man rarely impressed and never easily, stepped closer, his imposing frame casting a long shadow over Ilara. He hunkered down, his expensive trousers creasing in the dust, to examine the damage himself. His initial glare had softened into a frown of intense concentration, not of anger, but of dawning respect. Ilara, sensing a slight shift in the atmosphere, continued, her voice gaining a fraction more volume. "If you have a heavy chain and a strong pry bar, you might be able to temporarily secure the axle to the chassis. It won't be comfortable, and you'll have to go very slow, but it might get the coach to a place where it can be properly repaired. You'd need to lash it tight, distribute the load as best as possible to the remaining undamaged frame points." She gestured toward specific anchor points on the coach's sturdy underframe, areas that looked like they could bear the strain. Cletus, the young hand who had scoffed earlier, now looked thoroughly abashed. The other men murmured amongst themselves, their earlier skepticism replaced by a grudging admiration. This was no ordinary child. Silas listened intently, his gaze unwavering from the girl. He saw not just her grimy face and threadbare dress, but the intelligent light in her clear grey eyes, the way her brow furrowed in concentration as she explained the mechanics. He'd built his empire on shrewd judgment and recognizing untapped potential, whether in land, livestock, or men. He was beginning to sense something extraordinary here. "And how would a little thing like you know about leaf springs and chassis integrity?" he asked, his voice devoid of its earlier harshness, now carrying a note of genuine curiosity. Ilara shrugged, a small, almost apologetic movement. "Mr. Henderson, at the orphanage, he used to be a wheelwright. He had old books with drawings. And sometimes he'd let me watch him fix the old buckboard. He said I had a knack for seeing how things fit together, or why they broke." Her mention of the orphanage struck a chord with Silas, though he didn't show it. He knew of Greywood, a grim institution he'd made a few token donations to over the years, never giving it much thought beyond a cursory act of civic duty. As Ilara gestured again, explaining a finer point about leverage and weight distribution if they were to attempt her suggested temporary fix, a glint of metal on her small hand caught the afternoon sun. It was the tarnished silver ring. Silas's eyes, sharp and accustomed to detail, fixed upon it. The light was just right, illuminating the intricate carvings, the interlocked horseshoes, the tiny, almost worn-away star in the center. His breath hitched. A sudden, cold wave washed over him, despite the oppressive heat. The world around him seemed to recede, the voices of his men, the creak of the damaged coach, even the incessant buzz of insects, all faded into a distant hum. His gaze was locked on that ring. It couldn't be. Not after all these years. He'd seen a ring like that only once before, a lifetime ago. A ring he himself had commissioned, a unique design, a token of immense love and devastating loss. His heart, a stubborn, resilient organ that had weathered countless storms, began to hammer against his ribs with a force that stole his breath. He straightened up slowly, his eyes never leaving Ilara's hand. The mechanical problem with his coach, moments before the most pressing issue in his world, was suddenly, shockingly, insignificant. A tremor went through him, a tremor not of anger or frustration, but of a hope so profound and terrifying it threatened to unmake him. He reached out, his large, calloused hand trembling slightly, and gently took Ilara's smaller one. "Child," he said, his voice raspy, unfamiliar even to his own ears. Where did you get that ring?" Ilara looked up at him, surprised by the sudden change in his demeanor, the raw emotion that now filled his eyes. She looked down at her hand, at the familiar weight of the silver. I don't know, sir, she whispered, a little frightened by his intensity. I've always had it. As long as I can remember, always. The word echoed in the cavern of Silas's memory, a hollow, painful sound. For him, always had been the length of time he had mourned, the length of time he had lived with a gaping void in his soul. The coach, for the moment, was forgotten. Silas Blackwood, a man who commanded fortunes and ruled a vast swathe of Texas, found himself utterly fixated on a little orphan girl and the tarnished piece of silver on her finger. He gently turned her hand over in his, examining the ring more closely. The craftsmanship was unmistakable, the design unique, a pair of horseshoes, one facing up for luck, the other down, as his beloved Eleanor had insisted, to pour out blessings on others, and the tiny, 5-point star nestled between them, representing their shared dream, their guiding star. He had given it to Eleanor on their 5th anniversary, a custom piece from a master silversmith in San Antonio, long since past. And Eleanor had been wearing it the day she and their infant daughter, Lily, had vanished on a journey to visit her ailing sister. A flash flood, they'd said. No survivors, no carriage, nothing ever recovered except a single, shattered wagon wheel miles downstream. Grief had nearly broken him then. He'd poured all his energy into building his empire, a monument to his sorrow, a distraction from the hollowness within. Now, this child, this Elara, with her uncanny knowledge and her quiet strength, wore its twin, or perhaps. I've always had it, she'd said. Silas looked into her earnest grey eyes, searching for a flicker, a hint of a memory that wasn't hers. You don't remember anything before the orphanage? No family? No one who might have given it to you? Elara shook her head, her small face clouded with the familiar ache of not knowing. Mrs. Grimshaw says I was found. Just left on the steps. With a blanket and this ring. I was very small, she said. Too small to talk or say my name, left on the steps. With this ring. Silas felt a dizzying vertigo. Could it be possible? After all these years? The timeline, it was plausible. Lily would have been just an infant. If someone had found her, saved her from the flood, perhaps injured and unable to care for her themselves. What is your name, child? He asked, his voice softer now, threaded with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. Elara, sir, Elara. Not Lily. But names could be changed, given. The ring, however, the ring was a constant. It was a tangible link to a past he thought was buried forever beneath the silt and sorrow of the Brazos River. He looked at his foreman, Jed, whose weathered face was a mask of confusion and concern. Jed, Silas said, his voice regaining some of its customary authority, though edged with a new urgency. Get this coach secured as the girl suggested. Take it to Miller's workshop in town. I have other business to attend to. He turned back to Elara, his expression a mixture of awe, hope, and a terrible, burgeoning fear of disappointment. Elara, he said, I would like you to come with me. I need to speak with Mrs. Grimshaw at the orphanage. The journey to Greywood Orphanage was made in stunned silence, at least on Silas's part. He'd instructed one of his men to fetch a more robust, if less comfortable, buckboard. Elara sat beside him, small and quiet, occasionally glancing at the powerful man whose entire demeanor had shifted so dramatically. She clutched the hand that wore the ring, suddenly self-conscious of the piece of metal that had, in a few short moments, transformed her from an insignificant dust sprite into an object of intense, almost unnerving, scrutiny. The orphanage itself was a stark, grey stone building that seemed to sag under the weight of its own cheerlessness. As Silas Blackwood, a figure rarely seen in this impoverished part of town, strode through its creaking doors, a hush fell over the already subdued occupants. Mrs. Grimshaw, the matron, a woman whose face seemed permanently pursed in disapproval, emerged from her small office, her expression shifting from surprise to a calculated deference upon recognizing their visitor. Mr. Blackwood! To what do we owe this unexpected honor? She asked, her voice thin and reedy. Silas wasted no time on pleasantries. Mrs. Grimshaw, I'm here about this child. Elara, he gestured towards the girl, who stood slightly behind him, looking even smaller in the gloomy hallway. And specifically, about this ring, he gently took Ilara's hand again, showing the ring to the matron. Mrs. Grimshaw peered at it through her spectacles. Ah, yes. The ring. She's always had it. Came with her, it did. Along with a rather fine wool blanket, though threadbare. That's all we know. Her tone was flat, matter-of-fact, as if discussing inventory. And when exactly did she arrive? Silas pressed, his gaze intense. Let me see. Mrs. Grimshaw shuffled back into her office, emerging a moment later with a dusty ledger. She ran a bony finger down a page. Ah, here we are. Ilara. No surname. Left on the doorstep, morning of April the 17th, 22 years ago. Estimated to be around a year old, perhaps a little less. Found by old Martha, the cook at the time 22 years ago. April. The flash flood that had taken Eleanor and Lily had been in early April, 23 years ago. Lily had been just shy of her first birthday. The dates aligned with terrifying precision. If Ilara was estimated to be about a year old when found, 22 years ago, she would be 23 now. Silas felt his blood run cold, then hot. Was there anything else? A note? Any distinguishing marks on the child? Mrs. Grimshaw sniffed. If there had been a note of any consequence, Mr. Blackwood, we would have pursued it. As for marks, infants have many. Nothing that seemed out of the ordinary to the doctor who examined her at the time. Just a small, star-shaped birthmark on her left shoulder blade. Faded now, I imagine a star-shaped birthmark. Silas swayed, reaching out to steady himself against the door frame. Eleanor had called it Lily's a little star, a tiny, perfectly formed mark, a celestial echo of the star on the ring. He stared at Ilara, a desperate, wild hope warring with decades of ingrained grief. Her shoulder blade, he whispered. Silas's mind reeled. A star-shaped birthmark. The ring. The timing. It was too much to be coincidence, yet too fantastical to readily accept. He looked at Ilara, who watched him with wide, uncertain eyes, sensing the monumental shift her small existence was causing in this powerful man. Mrs. Grimshaw, oblivious to the storm raging within Silas, continued, she was a quiet babe. Caused little trouble. Always fiddling with things, taking them apart if she could. Clever with her hands, that one. Not much use for a girl destined for domestic service, but there it is. Her words, meant perhaps as a neutral observation, struck Silas with the force of a blow. This child, who might be his own flesh and blood, his Lily, dismissed as clever with her hands but not much use, the injustice of it, the lost years, the bleakness of her upbringing compared to the life she should have had, rose like bile in his throat. He needed more. He needed certainty, though his heart already screamed the truth. Mrs. Grimshaw, he said, his voice tight with controlled emotion, is there anyone still alive who was here when Ilara was found? Old Martha, the cook you mentioned. The matron pursed her lips. Martha passed on a good 5 years ago. Most of the staff from that time are gone or moved on. Records are what they are. She gestured vaguely at the dusty shelves lining her office, a testament to forgotten lives and bureaucratic indifference. Silas felt a surge of frustration. He turned his attention back to the ring. This silversmith, he thought aloud, the one who made this ring, his mark might be on it. Or he might remember the commission. It was a long shot. The silversmith, if he was even still alive, was in San Antonio, a long journey. But Silas was a man who moved mountains when he set his mind to it. He looked at Ilara. Would you mind if I examined the ring more closely? Perhaps take it to someone who knows about old silver. Ilara hesitated for only a moment before carefully sliding the ring from her finger. It felt strange, her hand suddenly bare after a lifetime of its presence. She held it out to him. It's all I have of, before, she said softly, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. Silas took the ring, its cool metal surprisingly heavy in his palm. He felt its familiar curves, the worn smoothness of the carvings. He knew this ring. He knew it as well as he knew his own hands. He needed to see that birthmark. But how to ask? How to broach such a delicate subject without frightening the girl further, without raising hopes that, however strong, could still be cruelly dashed? He decided a more indirect approach regarding the silversmith was best for now, while the confirmation of the birthmark needed a more private, gentle setting. He would take her away from this grim place, at least for a while. "Ilara," he said, making a decision that felt both impulsive and irrevocably right. "I own a large ranch. There is always work to be done. And I believe you have a keen mind for mechanical things. How would you feel about leaving Greywood, at least for a time, and coming to stay at the Bar M? We can look into this ring further." "And you deserve better than this," Mrs. Grimshaw gasped, her eyes widening. "Mr. Blackwood? That is highly irregular. She is a ward of the county until she comes of age or is suitably placed." Silas fixed her with a steely gaze. "I am one of the county's largest benefactors, Mrs. Grimshaw. I believe my suitabilities will not be questioned if I choose to offer a promising young woman an opportunity for honest work and a better life. I will handle the necessary arrangements." His tone brooked no argument. He turned back to Ilara, whose eyes were now shining with a mixture of disbelief and a fragile, burgeoning hope. "What do you say, Ilara?" She could only nod, a lump forming in her throat. The Bar M Ranch. It was a place of legend, a symbol of a world so far removed from her own reality that she could scarcely comprehend it. And yet, this man, the richest cowboy in the territory, was offering her a chance. Because of a broken wagon and a tarnished silver ring. The journey to the Bar M ranch house was a world away from the grim realities of Greywood. Ilara sat beside Silas in the buckboard, the vast, rolling acres of his land stretching out before them like a painted canvas. The ranch house itself was an imposing but welcoming structure of stone and timber, nestled in a valley with a clear stream running nearby. It exuded an air of rustic grandeur, of wealth hard-earned and deeply rooted in the land. Mrs. Travers, the housekeeper, a kind-faced woman with silvering hair, greeted them at the door, her expression one of polite surprise at the sight of the small, plainly dressed girl beside her employer. Silas, with a curt explanation that left much unsaid, instructed Mrs. Travers to prepare a room for Ilara and find her some suitable clothing. "And ensure she is comfortable," he added, a protective note in his voice that did not go unnoticed by the astute housekeeper. Once Ilara was settled, looking bewildered but clean in a borrowed dress many sizes too large, Silas retreated to his study, the ring clutched tightly in his hand. He needed to think, to plan. The birthmark was the next crucial piece of the puzzle. He sent a message via his fastest rider to Dr. Armitage, the old-town doctor who had served Redemption County for over 40 years, requesting his discreet presence at the ranch. While he waited, Silas stared at the ring. He pulled out a magnifying glass from his desk drawer and examined it minutely. There, on the inside of the band, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a tiny, stamped insignia, a stylized A.S. Antonio Silva. The San Antonio silversmith. He was long gone, Silas knew, but his son had taken over the business. Perhaps their records, if they still existed, would hold another piece of confirmation. But the birthmark, that was more immediate. When Dr. Armitage arrived, a portly man with kind eyes and a reassuring bedside manner, Silas explained the situation in hushed tones, omitting the more fantastical elements of his suspicions, focusing instead on his concern for Ilara and the mystery of her origins. He simply stated he had reason to believe she might be connected to a tragedy in his past and needed to confirm a specific identifying mark. The doctor, a man of discretion and compassion, listened patiently. "A star-shaped birthmark on her left shoulder blade, you say," he mused. "Uncommon, but not unheard of. I can certainly examine her, Silas, if the young lady is willing." Ilara, when gently approached by Mrs. Travers and Dr. Armitage, was understandably hesitant. But Silas spoke to her himself, his voice gentle, explaining that it was important for understanding her past, connected to the ring she wore. Trusting the unexpected kindness she had been shown, she agreed. In the privacy of her new room, with Mrs. Travers present, Dr. Armitage conducted a brief, respectful examination. A few minutes later, he emerged, his expression unreadable. Silas held his breath. Dr. Armitage looked directly at Silas. "Well, Silas," he began slowly, "the young lady is in good health, though clearly undernourished for some years. And yes, there is indeed a small, faded, but quite distinct stellate pigmented lesion, the star-shaped birthmark, precisely on her left scapula." The world tilted for Silas Blackwood. The air rushed from his lungs. It was true. All of it. The ring, the timing, the birthmark. This was no mere coincidence. This was a miracle, a cruel jest of fate turned into an impossible second chance. Lily. His Lily. Standing right here, in his house, after all these years. He sank into the nearest chair, the powerful rancher suddenly looking old and vulnerable. Tears, emotions he had suppressed for more than 2 decades, welled in his eyes. He didn't try to stop them. Through a watery haze, he saw Elara, Lily, being led back into the study by Mrs. Travers. She looked at him with concern, her brow furrowed. Silas struggled to compose himself, the reality of the doctor's confirmation washing over him in successive waves of disbelief, joy, and a profound, aching sorrow for the lost years. He motioned for Elara. He had to start thinking of her as Lily, his Lily, to come closer. She approached hesitantly, her gaze fixed on his tear-streaked face. Mrs. Travers and Dr. Armitage discreetly withdrew, sensing the deeply personal nature of the moment that was about to unfold. "Elara," Silas began, his voice thick with emotion, "what I am about to tell you may be difficult to believe. It is difficult for me to comprehend, even now." He took a deep, steadying breath. "That ring you wear. I gave it to my wife, Eleanor, many years ago. It was a unique design, made only for her." Elara's eyes widened, her hand instinctively going to her chest, where the ring would have been had she been wearing it. "And the birthmark on your shoulder, our daughter, Lily, had one just like it. We called it her little star." He paused, his gaze searching hers, willing her to understand, to feel the truth of his words. "There was an accident," he continued, his voice cracking. "A flash flood. We were told Eleanor and Lily were lost. That they perished. For 23 years, I believed I had lost everything." Elara stood frozen, her mind struggling to process the enormity of what he was saying. The daughter of this powerful, grieving man? The lost child in a story of such profound tragedy? It felt like a dream, a wild, impossible fantasy. "But how?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How could I have survived? Why was I at the orphanage?" Silas shook his head, his own question still unanswered. "I don't know all the details, child. Perhaps someone found you after the flood, injured, unable to identify you. Perhaps they were too poor or too frightened to come forward. They left you where you might be cared for, with the only link to your past they could provide, your mother's ring." He reached out and gently took her hands. "Your mother's name was Eleanor. And your name, your given name, is Lily. Lily Blackwood, Lily." The name felt foreign yet achingly familiar, like a half-remembered lullaby. Tears welled in her own eyes now, tears of confusion, of dawning understanding, of a grief she hadn't known she carried for a mother she couldn't recall and a life she never had. "My mother," she choked out. Silas nodded, his own tears flowing freely now. "She was the kindest, bravest woman I ever knew. And she would have loved you fiercely, just as I do." Lily, the name, spoken with such love and certainty, began to settle in her heart. He pulled out an old, leather-bound locket from his vest pocket, one he always carried. He fumbled with the clasp, his hand shaking, and opened it. Inside, on one side, was a miniature portrait of a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, Eleanor. On the other side, a tiny, faded photograph of a baby with a tuft of dark hair. "This was your mother," he said softly, showing her the portrait. "And this was you, Lily." Elara stared at the images, her vision blurring. The woman in the portrait, there was a resemblance, a shadow of her features in Elara's own face. And the baby, it was impossible to tell, yet a sense of connection, deep and primal, stirred within her. The story of her life, previously a blank page, was suddenly, overwhelmingly, being written. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotion and revelation. Silas officially began the process of acknowledging Elara as his daughter, Lily Blackwood. The legalities were complex, but his influence and the undeniable evidence of the ring and the birthmark smoothed many paths. The news spread like wildfire through Redemption County, a tale so extraordinary it bordered on myth. The little orphan girl, who had so astutely diagnosed the problem with the richest cowboy's wagon, was, in fact, his long-lost daughter. It was a story of biblical proportions, whispered in saloons, discussed over general store counters, and marveled at in ranch kitchens. For Lily, the transition was overwhelming. From the stark anonymity of Greywood, she was thrust into a life of comfort and affection she had never imagined. Mrs. Travers fussed over her, ensuring she had beautiful new clothes that actually fit, and nourishing meals that made her realize just how hungry she had always been. The ranch hands, who had initially been stunned into silence, now treated her with a mixture of awe and a dawning, protective affection. Cletus, who had once mocked her, was now her most devoted admirer, quick to offer a helping hand or a shy smile. Silas, however, was the anchor in her new world. He spent hours with her, sharing stories of Eleanor, painting a vivid picture of the mother she had never known. He showed her old photographs, Eleanor's cherished books, a pressed flower from their wedding day. He spoke of their dreams for the Bar M, their hopes for their child. And as he spoke, Lily began to see not just Silas Blackwood, the formidable rancher, but a father, a man who had carried an immense sorrow for over 2 decades, a man whose heart was slowly, miraculously, beginning to heal. He encouraged her interest in mechanics, taking her to the workshop where his coach was being meticulously repaired with a new, custom-forged spring assembly, based, in part, on her insightful observations. The foreman there, Mr. Miller, listened with genuine respect as she discussed stress points and load bearings. Silas watched these interactions with a quiet pride, seeing Eleanor's intelligence and his own practical acumen reflected in their daughter. The ring, now polished and gleaming, remained on Lily's finger. It was no longer just a piece of tarnished silver, a link to an unknown past. It was a symbol of reunion, of love enduring beyond tragedy, of an identity reclaimed. It was a testament to her mother's love and her father's unwavering memory. The true antagonist in their story had been cruel fate, the anonymity of tragedy, and the indifference of a system that had failed to look deeper. Now, that fate was being rewritten, not by anger or revenge, but by the quiet power of truth and the undeniable bond of family. Silas never did find out exactly who had rescued Lily from the floodwaters and left her at the orphanage. Perhaps it was a traveler, themselves displaced, or a settler too afraid of the authorities. In the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was here, she was home. The void in Silas Blackwood's life, once a vast and barren wasteland, was now filled with the laughter and light of his rediscovered daughter. The richest cowboy in Texas was finally, truly, rich beyond measure. Years passed. The Bar M ranch flourished, not just in cattle and land, but in warmth and happiness. Lily Blackwood, once the orphan Elara, grew into a remarkable young woman. She possessed her mother's grace and compassion, and her father's keen intellect and determination. She pursued an education in engineering, her childhood fascination with how things worked blossoming into a genuine talent. Yet, she never lost her connection to the ranch, often returning to help Silas implement new, innovative irrigation systems or design more efficient machinery for their operations. The ring, her mother's ring, remained her most cherished possession, a constant reminder of her miraculous journey from obscurity to belonging. Silas Blackwood, his hair now entirely silver, his face etched with the softer lines of contentment rather than the harsh grooves of grief, was a changed man. The loneliness that had haunted his grand house for so long was banished, replaced by the lively presence of his daughter and, in time, her own family. He found joy in simple things, watching Lily explain the principles of a new engine design with passionate clarity, or seeing her ride across the plains, as skilled a horsewoman as any on the ranch. The people of Redemption County often spoke of the story, the legend of the orphan girl and the richest cowboy. It became a tale of hope, a testament to the unexpected ways life could mend what was broken. It reminded them that worth was not always visible, that talent could be found in the humblest of places, and that sometimes, against all odds, destiny could weave a pattern of profound and beautiful justice. The shadow of Mrs. Grimshaw and the cold indifference of Greywood faded, replaced by the enduring legacy of kindness and the power of an undeniable truth, sparked by a broken wagon and revealed by a simple, tarnished ring. Silas often looked at Lily, his heart swelling with a love that was both old and new, a love resurrected. He knew Eleanor would have been immensely proud. And in those moments, he understood that the greatest fortune he had ever possessed was not his land or his herds, but the improbable, precious gift of his daughter, returned to him from the tides of sorrow, a guiding star that had finally found its way home. The moral of their story echoed through the valleys and across the plains, that even in the deepest darkness, the smallest glint of truth, like a star on a silver ring, can lead to the most extraordinary dawn.